So what maintains all these actors within the state and which formulate foreign policy on behalf of the state is exactly that sentence, on behalf of the state. All these actors are perceived as having a common loyalty to the state and thus contributing together to the formulation of foreign policy for the state. Does this apply to the new actor structure of the EU? Can we have the next slide, please? A very preliminary answer would be yes. The new actors of the EU tend to be actors with a rather supranational identity, a more supranational nature, and therefore their loyalty would be perceived as more to the EU level than to other levels of foreign policy making. The High Representative has tasks designated by the treaty which is a step towards supranationalism when compared to previous individuals or actors representing the foreign policy of the EU, such as the High Representative for CFSP, Javier Solana, who was more accountable to the Council, which is an intergovernmental institution. The European External Action Service is, again, a sui generis organization. It's made up of Commission and Council employees and state representatives. Therefore, again, it possesses a certain nature, a mixture, which suggests that its loyalty is to the EU and acts on the behalf of the EU. Although, of course, because of the existence of state representatives, there have been substantial debates about the extent to which various states will be able to influence this body, which is why its action has been delayed, the implementation of its its beginning of functioning has been delayed and become a subject of various debates. The Commission, which continues to be an important actor in EU foreign policy, is by nature a supranational actor, and the Parliament, which is now empowered, again, is the main institution representing legitimacy in the EU in behalf of the publics of the whole of the European Union. Next. In addition to all these actors which act on behalf of the EU, if we adopt the foreign policy model that I referred to before, the one that takes into consideration new actors, such as the mass media and think tanks, again, on the EU level, we have, since 2007, a formulation of such types of new actors which are loyal to the EU in terms of their, again, when I say loyal to the EU, I am referring to acting on behalf of the European Union as a whole and not representing the interests or agendas of a member state. What we've seen since 2007 is a Europeanization of the public sphere and of the media sphere. Therefore, the agenda setting that takes place through the media is more of a European, it has become more Europe-wide than national. And in terms of think tanks as actors in foreign policy, we have again witnessed since 2007, particularly with the creation of the European Council on Foreign Relations, the first Europe-wide think tank advising foreign policy, therefore a consortium based in various places in the EU and a consortium of foreign policy think tanks across Europe. So through this creation of think tanks of a Europe-wide nature, we have again seen the creation of consulting actors in foreign policy that are of a European nature. Next slide. Overall, so overall, looking at the reformulation, the reconstruction of European foreign policy after the Lisbon Treaty, both through the institutions introduced by the Lisbon Treaty, but also through the emergence of Europe-wide secondary consulting actors such as think tanks and mass media, it's possible to say that we are moving to a more institutionally capable European Union in the area of foreign policy, and that these new actors are in fact empowering a supranational foreign policy on behalf of the EU. However, going back to the theory now, we have to take into consideration what is also happening in terms of expectations in the EU, therefore what is happening in terms of the agenda. Could I have the next slide, please? There have been some factors beyond the Lisbon Treaty in the past 2 or 3 years that have affected the perceptions and expectations of the European Union as an international actor, and that in turn has affected the agenda of the European Union directly or indirectly. What have we had since 2007? We've had an economic crisis. We are increasingly witnessing an energy security crisis in Europe. We've had a transformation of the world order, which is ongoing, of course, with the emergence of new powers, notably the BRICS. And in 2008, the European Union was presented itself with a report on the implementation of its security strategy, which was not, it did not seem disappointing at first, but a profound reading of it would suggest that there have been certain disappointments in the EU's expectations with itself. All of this together has caused a general fall in the perception of the EU's abilities as a global actor, and that in turn a fall in expectations. This is particularly notable, for example, when one discusses with the representatives of the European Commission in various countries, including Brazil, for example, where it would be noted by the Commission representative that, in fact, the European Union is not being given as much consideration by governments as it used to be, and that member states of the EU, such as Germany and France, are perceived as more important in the foreign policy of other states. What is the conclusion from these factors? That expectations of the EU have fallen. That, in one sense, would mean that the gap between capabilities and expectations have closed. Therefore, that a less ambitious and more realistic EU foreign policy with the concrete EU-level actors that have emerged is the new state of affairs. This is what Asle Toje in 2010 coined the EU as a small power. More capabilities, specific actors because of the treaties, but a smaller, narrower agenda with less expectations. The next one. At the same time, and again now I remind you of the Europeanization framework, the economic crisis, and again the same factors, energy security, what we would call the international conjuncture, has caused the member states of the European Union, which I remind you are also actors in European Union foreign policy, to adopt a more introverted approach to foreign policy. Some have called this a return to national foreign policy. What we could call it would be a temporary tendency to watch out more for their own interests, and so for the states to formulate a foreign policy agenda based on their own interests. What does this mean in the formulation of their agenda? Individual states attempting to enter into bilateral regional agreements. Here I've noted, the geographic implications of that, most notably, for example, for Brazil, the fact that Spain is promoting relations with South America. Do we have a move towards the Europeanization? Would that mean that the state is a more empowered actor vis-à-vis the EU? Perhaps. This is something to be thought about. But what is the impact of these tendencies of the state as foreign policy actors on the EU agenda? Well, at first sight, and if one thinks about it theoretically, or rather in terms of the treaties, not much has changed on the EU agenda. The EU agenda, foreign policy agenda, is set by the treaties, is defined by the European security strategy and the report on its implementation, and it maintains the same objectives which were condensed by Karen Smith in 2007 as encouragement of regional cooperation, promotion of human rights, democracy, good governance, prevention of conflict, fight against crime. However, more and more the agenda is reflecting concern over the economic prosperity and stability of the EU rather than this normative approach towards the EU as a global power. And because I'm running out of time, I will ask to go to the next slide and just briefly mention that 2 days ago, on the 7th of September, Commission President Barroso, in his first State of the Union of the EU, pointed out a few elements of the EU foreign policy agenda, and for whoever is interested in discourse analysis or adopts such an approach to foreign policy analysis, it was clear by the discourse of Mr. Barroso that economics are taking first place in the foreign policy agenda of the EU, as all these points, reform of international financial institutions, effective global financial safety, renewed trade policy are all points that refer to stabilizing the European economy in the world. So I will skip the other observations, which are quite self-explanatory, that personalities and presidencies are actually quite influential in the formulation of EU foreign policy. I actually have time, so I will explain that personalities affect foreign policy agendas, and that can be examples that can illustrate that are, for example, Mrs. Ashton's. Oh, I was in the previous one. Anyway. Mrs. Ashton's dedication to the Middle Eastern, to the resolution of the Middle Eastern conflict, Mr. Sarkozy's dedication to promoting migration management agenda, recently David Cameron's decision that it's a good thing to continue promoting enlargement and that Turkey is our own brick, so that should be an item on our foreign policy agenda. So it's important to remember, as always, that personalities continue to be actors in the making of European foreign policy. And of course that in Europe, beyond personalities, there is also the institution of the presidency of the European Union, which also in its turn is a significant actor in formulating the agenda. Such was the example of the Spanish presidency and the promotion of the Mercosur-EU agreement. Belgium is currently prioritizing the resolution of the problems with the External Action Service and so on and so forth. So to conclude, it would seem that the foreign policy of the European Union and its future is at a critical juncture. Undoubtedly, the EU has developed new institutions, consultation, decision-making mechanisms, and normalized the relations between the actors that contribute to the making of European foreign policy. But what the agenda of European foreign policy will be in the next few years will depend on how the EU goes about reestablishing, or rather securing, its role in the global setting. Is the EU moving away from the global power agenda? There are many analysts that argue that it is, and mostly because of a lack of a strategy, the lack of a grand strategy, but also the lack of capacities to be a global power. However, it is very early to say. A big question, again, is how will states' individual foreign policies develop vis-à-vis European Union foreign policy? In other words, if states do decide to retreat to a more nationalized foreign policy agenda, then clearly the future of the European Union as an international actor will be jeopardized. But until we find out how all these issues are going to be involved, we can just conclude that the EU is facing the traditional, this theoretical analysis of EU foreign policy is re-entering the traditional dilemmas that it has been in since the 1950s, when the European Economic Community was created, the dilemmas of how to balance out the national with the supranational, and in the current environment, how this will affect the formulation of EU foreign policy, agendas and actors.